Has anybody ever seen this? A lifeboat at a beach? Has anybody ever seen that? I thought, what a great idea. You know, it's the first time in 50, 60 years that I've seen that. And this is at Moose Lake State Park. We stopped there on the way down. And there's the life jacket there. And the analogy is here is getting across. Your life is the lake. You're going to go from one shore to the other, birth to death. The lake is your life. And you're getting close to the deep end right now. In a few years, you're going to be on your own. You're just going to be sink or swim. And your teachers are trying to equip you for what's coming out at life. And there's going to be storms. There's going to be heartaches. There's going to be deaths. There's going to be times when you're going to be frustrated. There's going to be times when you think, this isn't right. This isn't fair. And you're right. This isn't right. Life isn't fair. And my life, my dad died when I was 20. I was pretty mad at God. And it wasn't God's fault. It was Satan's fault. You know, it was sin that brought death into the world. And when people die, it just doesn't seem right, right? And so that's, you know, Adam and Eve messed it up and Jesus fixed it. And so that life preserver there, that's Jesus. And you guys have the answer. And there's a lot of people in the storms of life out there and they're sinking without Jesus, and it's up to you to get them there. And that's why I'm so excited for what we have in creation right now. And yeah, the storm. And then when I was your age, you know, I spent a lot of time putting a ball in a basket. I really did. Had a lot of fun, just loved it. But now I wish I would have learned how to build a house. I wish I knew how to do some sheetrocking and electrical. You know, I went on a church building project near Chicago. I was there for a week or two. And I was just so amazed with the guys and the skills they had and the skills I didn't have. And I found out I was pretty much gifted in getting the garbage to the dumpster. That was what I could do. I couldn't break anything that way. And the other thing I could do is pull wire through the conduit. You know, I could pull that, you know, and so that's what I could do to make myself helpful. But I encourage you to develop some skills. I asked, we were bringing Kent Hovind to the airport one time, and I asked him, you know, what advice would you have to my teenage kids here? And he said, make sure you can try to make money with your head and your hands. So if something happens to one, you can make money with the other ones. And then he said, and then have hobbies like plumbing and electrical and stuff like that. So make yourself of value. And so I encourage you to, if you have opportunities to serve, especially on a church building project or Habitat for Humanity, those are some valuable skills. And you'll be glad that you had them. And what else could I tell you when I'm young? Yeah, when I was your age, you know, and it's, oh, how would you say that? Life's not going to go as planned. Just figure on that. So you make the adjustments. And look at what you have. Don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. You know, there's that saying, I once complained about my tattered shoes, and then I met a man who had no feet. So we have a lot of blessings here. You hit the lottery when you were born in America. We have the freedom to speak. And with that, we have the freedom to share Christ. And with that, we have the freedom to throw the life preserver to people who are sinking. And I'm so thankful somebody shared the gospel with me when I was 32. You know, I went to church for 32 years and I didn't know what the gospel was. And that was the answer. That's what the answer is. And yesterday I spoke at Emmanuel Baptist Church. I'm going to speak there again on Sunday. And so if you want to see another talk, we've got a YouTube channel also. And somebody asked me, well, what's the most amazing thing about the body that makes you think of God? And I tried to explain this to them, and I didn't do a very good job. So when a baby is living in liquid, that has to happen for him to breathe air.
Here's the prenatal with its 3 separate loops. Here's the newborn with the 1 loop that just goes figure 8, back and forth, body, lungs. What must happen? The ductus venosus, the bypass around the liver, has to close. The umbilical vein closes and the umbilical arteries close. The shortcut through the top half of the heart, through the foramen ovale, has to close. Look at the foramen ovale closing. With that increased pressure, that door is going to slam shut. And it happens just about that fast. It takes a few seconds. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, cells grow and the thing is sealed shut. What about closure of the ductus arteriosus, that bypass around the lungs? It goes from this big wide artery down to that ligament. It becomes a ligament over the course of the next weeks. So those 5 things have to happen.
All those valves have to shut. And all those bypasses have to close. So the heart starts working, the lung starts working. And that has to happen the first time, or you're dead. That can't happen by chance. And so, my brother had a dairy farm, and I said, that probably happened to every one of your calves. And I would go to the zoo. It probably happened to every one of those animals. That's an amazing design. It's not going to happen by chance. And you can see more of these at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association YouTube channel. And it's like a library. If you want to hear what a creationist has to say about geology or biology or astronomy or history or paleontology, it's all right there. So you don't have to look through everything. You could just go to the topic you want. And then some of them are broken up into highlights. And so that's what we're doing today. This is an exciting time in history because we've never had, or this is there's more evidence against evolution and the Big Bang than ever in history, than ever before. And there's more this information is more easily accessed than ever before. So what I'm doing is I'm cracking the door of creation open. You guys know it, but I want to equip you so you can stand up to this godless dogma of the Big Bang and evolution that permeates our society. And this will help you. There's about 12.5 websites and YouTube channels. Some of the videos are only a minute long. Just get in the habit of doing something every day, because little changes over a long period of time add up to something that's significant, good or bad. And Luke 2:52, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and found favor with God and man. So just think of your life, wisdom and stature. So he's getting smarter, he's getting bigger, found favor with God, so that's spiritual, and man, so he's got friends, social. So just think of your life as having 4 spokes: body, mind, spirit, and social. All right? And do something every day to get through that lake. Because if you don't take care of your body, you're not going to make it across as far as you could have. And so just do something every day. I'm closer to that shore than the shore you're at. And I do 10, 15 minutes of workout in the morning. And I say, that's the price I pay to stay out of a nursing home. I just want to take care of my body so God can use it as long as He can, and so we can reach as many people as possible. And so there's a battle right now for your mind. It's the battle between God's truth and Satan's lies. And that's in every area of life. It's every decision you're going to make. Am I going to do what God says or what the world says? And you do what the world says, hey, the way of the transgressor is hard. And I can point to you examples. You did stuff that God didn't want you to do, and now life's hard. And you think it's fences holding you in, keeping you from fun. No, it's guardrails. Guardrails. This is where the blessings are. You step outside these guardrails, is you can get diseases, you can get, whatever, hurt really bad. And encourage you, wait until you're married. Stay pure and then stay faithful. That's what God wants. And if you do it backwards, you're going to have heartache. And anyhow, God gives good gifts. But anyhow, what's the battle here? This is a blind chance timeline. Okay, the Big Bangers think we got here by chance. The evolutionists think we got here by chance. So I just loop them together and I call them blind chancers. People either believe that we got here by chance or that we were created. So this is their worldview, the blind chance timeline. Okay, and we're going to break laws of physics for this. 13 billion years ago, matter came from nothing, violating the first law of thermodynamics. And then it organized itself and made this great environment for us to live in, violating the second law of thermodynamics. Things usually fall apart. Explosions don't put things together and make it better. It makes it worse. And then life began 4 billion years ago. That violates the law of biogenesis. Life only comes from life. We've never seen it come from non-life. And so an eternal life giver gave us life. We can handle that. And then that single life turned into everything that's all the plants and animals and people that have ever lived came from that single living cell. And how that happens, they asked Richard Dawkins, how do you add information to the genome? And he paused for about 20 seconds. That's an uncomfortable pause. He's looking around and he finally says, stop recording. They don't know how to add information to that, so they don't know. It's a lot of imagination. And then Einstein's gulf. He says, how do you get immaterial ideas from the material world? He says that's a gulf that's unbridgeable, and yet they have to break all those laws of physics to get to where we are today. Contrast that with the creation timeline. Instead of billions, we're using thousands, which is a lot smaller, right? Okay, well, push it out a bit, and you got creation. It's roughly 6,000 years ago. God made everything in 6 days. That's where the laws of physics, God made stuff from out of nothing. He can do that. He's a supernatural creator. He can make life from non-life because He's the eternal life giver. So He did all those things in 6 days, and then He rested. And then 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. And that's where the fossils and layers of sedimentary rock come from. And then Jesus came roughly 2,000 years ago, and He's coming back. And on the blind chance timeline, people get here way at the end. And on the creation timeline, people are there right at the beginning. And people ask me, well, which one do I believe? And it's like, well, I just agree with Jesus. Mark 10:6, he said, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So Jesus was a young earth creationist. Notice that? From the beginning of the creation, he's a creationist. And the beginning, he made them male and female, not millions of years later. So Jesus is our example. And Jesus was a young earth creationist, and if we're not following the example of Jesus, we're on real thin ice, and that's where a lot of seminaries and Christian colleges are right now. They're trying to squeeze evolution into the Bible. They just put a cross on it, and that basically calls Jesus a liar. So don't fall for that one. You know, if we could just get the pastors to believe what the Bible said, I think it could change things. And this is the creation timeline. Okay, the creation timeline is based on logic and facts. A creation, or a building had a builder, a painting had a painter, and a creation had a creator. That's logical. And it's factual. You know, we got a finely tuned universe. Yeah, that's the way God made it. You know, and we got comets that can't last millions of years. Yeah, that's because we're not millions of years old. We got a magnetic field that's got a half-life of 1,400 years. So 20,000 years ago, it'd be like a neutron star here, so that magnetic field can't be millions of years old. We've got spiral galaxies, which should have wound up in a million years, but that's no problem, because we're not millions of years old. We got an expanding universe at an accelerating rate, and that's because God, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and then he stretched out the heavens. So that's what God did. And then we've got dinosaur blood, which can't last millions of years. Dinosaur nerves, which certainly can't last millions of years. We find all that stuff. And then carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds. All that stuff cannot be millions of years old. And then we've had accurate predictions. I did a debate, and you'll see it on this Standing for Truth YouTube channel. It's also on mine. Mine's at the top. I debated a science teacher. And he asked me, well, what in the universe points to 6,000 years? And I said, the magnetic field of Uranus. Because Russell Humphreys, he accurately predicted it by using a 6,000-year model. And I had a few more things, but the science teacher didn't want to hear them. Then the diffusion rate of helium from zircons in granite, he was accurate based on a 6,000-year model. There's too much helium in there. That should have all been gone over millions of years. And then they got rounded boulders in comets. That Walt Brown predicted that, because if things break apart in space, they're going to have jagged edges. This had rounded, so you had to go through a fast flow of water before they get shot up there, and that's the hydroplate theory. And then you got vestigial organs have function. They never thought they did, so a lot of people had their appendix out and their tonsils out, and they're not as healthy as they could be. And then junk DNA, we said, no, it's got a function, and we were right, and they were wrong. And then we said there's no infant galaxies. All the predictions that they make, we say, no, you're wrong, and we're typically right. It's getting so bad now that Jason Lyle, he predicted what they'd say when they're wrong, and he was right. You know, he said, you're wrong about the James Webb Space Telescope images. We're not going to see population 3 stars. We aren't going to see infant galaxies. And when you realize you're wrong, you're going to say galaxies formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. The Big Bang has fallen apart in our lifetime, and we've got the theory that's going to push it over the edge. We've got all the information, we got the accurate predictions, we got easy access to this information, but what we don't have is enough people pushing it off the cliff, and that's why I'm here. I'm showing you guys how to get equipped and get informed so you can inform others, because once enough people realize what the hydroplate theory can do, nobody's going to believe the Big Bang. Okay, now this is the blind chance timeline. It's based on imagination and fraud. It's illogical. A building had a builder, a painting had a painter, but a creation didn't have a creator? You know, did this building get put together by chance? No, that's absurd, right? How much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance? But that's all the government schools teach, that's all the museums teach, and if that's all people ever saw, like me, they're going to be confused. You just memorize, you don't think. You have to see both sides if you want to think, and thank God you have a school that understands this. So you get equipped. You guys have the answer to a dying world. So it's based on imagination. They have to imagine a multiverse. Yeah, we live in the perfect universe. What are the chances of that? That's pretty rare. Unless there's an infinite number of universes out there and we just happen to be in the right one. So they have to imagine that. Oh, there's comets, but it can't last millions of years. They imagine an Oort cloud to fill them up. They imagine a dynamo inside the Earth, but that doesn't work for Uranus because the magnetic field is not on center and there's not enough heat for that. They have to imagine dark matter for those spiral galaxies. They have to imagine dark energy, which is like anti-gravity. They have to imagine all that stuff to keep this belief system there. And it's just a matter of time before it all falls apart. And then they have unknown dinosaur, the dinosaur blood and nerves and stuff. They have to imagine an unknown process that does it. They won't change the date of the dinosaurs. And you just change the date, it all fits. And then they've had blunders. They used to say that there was the master race. You heard about that? And that's why this is important, because you're made in the image of God. You're not a bunch of cells. You're not a mutated animal. You're made in the image of God, therefore you have value. But with natural selection is, right, hey, it's the survival of the fittest, which means the destruction of the unfit. And 100 years ago, the scientists were talking about the superior race, and they thought wars were good to get rid of the unfit. I got quotes on that. I gave them to my science teacher, the debate. And even in about 100 years ago, 1925, yeah, that would have been, Oliver Wendell Holmes said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, and they forcibly sterilized, I forget her name, it was Buck versus Bell. They forcibly sterilized, and in America, they forcibly sterilized 70,000 people in 35 states. Because we're just, that helps natural selection move along. So these beliefs have consequences. And now the last one sterilized was 1973. In my lifetime. That's what happened in America when you kick God out of the equation. And now in Canada, they got medical assistance and dying. You just pick up the phone, they'll come and take care of you. It's just stunning. Just stunning what's happening when you reject God. That's why I'm here, so that you guys understand how important this is, and then so we can get rid of the Big Bang once and for all. And then there's blunders. Okay, the vestigial organs, we talked about that already, and junk DNA, they're wrong about that. And then frauds. We'll show you Haeckel's drawing. I've got talks on the Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, Orsi Man. All these were frauds. And then they break laws of physics. Okay, and I went through our St. Cloud textbooks, and this is what I found in our St. Cloud textbooks. It's copyright 2024, talking about how these chemicals slosh together, and over millions of years that process can lead to living organisms. That is false. And that is because hydrolysis breaks the molecules apart faster than they can get put together. And I've got talks where I show a PhD chemist explaining it. There's a NASA scientist who has to admit it. She didn't want to admit it, but that's the case. Life cannot begin in water. But you need water for life. So that's a real conundrum for the blind chancers. And then you're also being taught that one with perhaps the best scientific evidence is the prebiotic soup theory. Okay, you've heard of that? Ken Hovind was debating at a place, and this woman came up, she's all upset, and she said, "Tonight you said we came from a rock. We do not believe we came from a rock." And he said, "Well, where did we come from?" He goes, "Are you an evolutionist?" And she says, "Yeah, I teach at the university." And he said, "Well, where did we come from?" And those are great questions. Where did people come from? If they point you to Adam and Eve, they believe what God said. If they point you to ape-like ancestors, they don't believe what God said. So it's real important for you to know who's talking to you and what side they're on. And it's real important when you go off to college or wherever, who you surround yourself with, because you'll become like the friends you hang around with. And so it's very important. You want to have friends that bring you closer to God, not farther away from God. And he asked, where'd we come from? And she said, from the macromolecule. And he said, well, where'd that come from? She said, from the prebiotic soup. And he said, well, where'd that come from? And she said, well, it rained on the rocks for millions of years. And I got a textbook that shows it rained on the rocks. So they believe they came from rocks. That takes a lot of faith. But this is Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, who explains why life can't begin in water.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans. But you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water-absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
And so I took that clip and I played it for the school board. Because I went to the school board, or I went to the curriculum director and I showed him a bunch of these errors, and you're going to see these errors on the sheet and where you can go to find, or where you can get rid of them, or you can debunk them. And I pointed them out to the curriculum director, and she said, well, we're just teaching the state standards. And I said, well, what standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she didn't respond, but the superintendent emailed me and said, we've contacted a law firm in our response. It's like, why don't you contact the publisher and get it fixed? But they didn't do that. They contacted a law firm. So I went to the school board and I asked if they would contact them. And long story short, they never did. And so 1.6, has anybody ever heard we're 1% different from chimpanzees? Anybody ever heard that? Yeah. It's stunning where they get it. And this is not a creation website. This is a blind chance website. They got rid of 1.3 billion letters and compared the rest. You don't believe me? Here we go.
If a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatched sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
So to get 99% similar, they got to eliminate 18% of the chimp and 25% of ours. So they're just manipulating that data every which way from Sunday. So can we trust our scientists? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And so, yeah, so when it's in the museums, and I gave a talk last night at the Emmanuel Baptist Church, and I went through how we can't trust the museums, we can't trust the textbooks, we can't trust the AI. You know, there's a lot of things. We just have to put our trust in the Bible. The Bible's not going to lie to us. So this was false, and they showed these, Haeckel's drawings. You see that on the right? It's the bird, the bunny, and the person. You look on the left, they all got the same embryo. Well, those are images of Haeckel's fake drawings, which were proven false over 100 years ago. Those images on the top, they look real similar to what's in our textbooks. Those he drew in about the 1870s because he wanted evidence for evolution. And there wasn't any, so I thought, well, I'll make some. And this is what they actually look like. They don't look anything like what he drew. They don't look anything like each other. And yet that was in the textbooks. I was at the county fair. I'm doing everything I can to get this information out. And the guy said they should update their textbooks. And I said, it's a 2024 textbooks. They don't get any more updated. And it's just stunning that the stuff that's false, and you go into New Scientist, it says, it's embarrassing but true, some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. See, their blind chance perspective is false, and you can't prop something false up with truth, so you have to prop it up with false information. And that's what's going on. It still appears in reference books. This is in 1997 they're saying this. They know it's false. And it says, although Haeckel confessed to drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud by the University of Vienna, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. Well, just understand a lot of what's in there is false. And they're saying this is a fact. Scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis to why our eyes are wired backwards. And that's not true. In PubMed, it talks about how they're like fiber optics. Glial cells guide light just like fiber optics. And it's really good for optimization. And then we've got Lucy's hip, and what they did to that, they cut it and twisted it.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's.
Yeah, it's a chimp hip. But what do they do to it?
But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Well, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back together the way you want it to. So they manipulate the data, they manipulate the photos, they manipulate the fossils. That's all they can do to get people to believe in this blind chance. And when people believe in blind chance, they reject God the Creator. Well, what chance do they have of putting their faith in God's Son, Jesus, to pay for their sins and go to heaven? So this is what this is all about. We need to help them see that, hey, you're being taught lies. And then this one, I love this one. And I contacted the publisher myself, and they didn't get back to me. You know, and so we just have to help people realize the textbooks are wrong, the museums are wrong, the AI is wrong. And this one, it says, the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay. So this is a fact, 2008. Well, in 2019, NASA said they found the Earth's oldest rock on the moon. So they're telling false information. And I pointed it out to them, and they don't care. Or, well, I shouldn't say they don't care. They have done nothing to fix it. And it says the rock crystallized about 12 miles beneath the Earth's surface. How do you get a rock forming 12 miles under the surface on the moon? Well, that's what the hydroplate theory is. And I'll do my best to explain it. On Sunday, if you can, get to Emmanuel Baptist Church at 10 o'clock. I'll be showing slides on the hydroplate. And so, yeah, the hydroplate is awesome. But you're going to get this information real quickly. It's going to have highlights of where you get 6,000 years. You get it from astronomy with Uranus. You get it from geology with the zircons. And then you also get it with the mutation rate. And this is Ann Gibbons. She said, mitochondria Eve would have been a mere 6,000 years ago, the first woman. Okay? And so there's three things, and then it's going to get accurate predictions on the hydroplate. You're going to see the blind chance perspective, so you know where to attack them. How did life begin? Where did matter come from? They can't answer any of that. And just the other week, my niece, we were talking, whatever, somebody said, well, I don't believe in God. I said, okay, well, without God, how did life begin? And she said, that's a good question. You know, answer a fool according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. Or don't answer a fool according to their folly, then how does that go? Lest you be like him. So they want you to play in the blind chance playground. And just do it to show them how absurd it is. Don't take their premise as for you to make decisions. So, okay, how did life begin? They can't answer that. I ask that all the time on campus. Nobody can answer it. If they try to tell you that they can do it, that they haven't, there's $10 million available, then you're going to have a list of the errors in the textbooks, and you can search these out, look at the sources yourself so you know that it's false. And then you got the rescuing devices there too. So this will equip you. You know, my prayer is that you kick this creation door down, you get very focused on this, you get very excited about it, and you start sharing it with everybody. And 20 years from now, somebody might be flying you to Houston to hear what you have to say. Because that happened to me twice last year. And then you got these fun websites. Okay, now this. Yeah, we got a little bit of time for this. This ends at 9, right? And that clock is accurate. We got about 1:45? Okay. Okay, good. The hydroplate theory. I gave this talk at St. Cloud State. And this was a poster. It said, answers to scientific problems, the origin of Grand Canyon, nerves in dinosaur bones, fusing past iron, plateau formation, cubonite that's formed in really hot water, in comets, frozen mammoths standing up. Anybody know that they found a mammoth that was standing up in frozen? It's like, that's a tough one over millions of years. You got peanut-shaped asteroids. You know, they should blow each other to smithereens when they come together, but they come together real gently. You got rounded boulders. We talked about that. The rock from Earth on the moon, we talked about that. And then shells on Mount Everest. And we had our very first hydroplate conference 2 years ago. And I went to the science department at St. Cloud State. I invited all the professors. I went to the president's office at St. Cloud State. I invited her. And I don't know if anybody watched it or not, but it had all the answers. But what I do know is they stole our poster. Somebody did. So I reported it, and we put up another one, and they stole that one too. And the camera was right there. They know who did it. They won't tell us if it's student, faculty, or staff, though, and they won't make them pay for it. And so nothing bothers me more than censorship. So it's like, okay, you're going to steal our posters? We're going to hang another one up. Instead of doing it online, we're going to do it at the public library with our creation group. So we had the posters up again, and we got 50 flyers that plastered them all over St. Cloud State, and at the top of it said, see what a poster thief wants to censor at SCSU. And I had that at the table, and then students wanted to see what was being censored. And then they started to rip up the flyers, and it's like, oh, well, we'll do it right here at St. Cloud State. And we did the talk right at St. Cloud State. And you can see these talks if you grab one of my cards. I've got a YouTube channel. And you can see these talks on campus. And so the hydroplate theory, real quickly, in a nutshell, if you can, it answers all these things. And I asked everybody on campus, even the LGBT students, it's like, is this an offensive poster? And they all said no. So my guess is it was a professor who understood what this would do to the Big Bang, what would it do for the millions of years. And I think what really bothered him is in that white square, that's a cover of Microscopy Today. Those are dinosaur nerves. Dinosaur nerves on the cover of Microscopy Today, and dinosaur nerves can't last millions of years. I think that that's why they stole it. Twice, putting their academic and professional career on the line, breaking their code of conduct. Okay. Real quickly, the hydroplate theory. It's based on one assumption. That one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the Earth at one time. Okay, that's the only assumption. So just think of the Earth as a big apple. The skin is made of granite that's 60 miles thick. Underneath that is a layer of water about a mile thick. And underneath that is the mantle. That's it. That's the one assumption. But then you throw the laws of physics at it, you put the moon in it, which is going to tug on the Earth twice a day, or you're going to have tides twice a day. It's going to stretch and compress, stretch and compress. And it's going to add heat. It's like if I had a wire and bend it back and forth, it's going to get hot. Well, the Earth's crust was getting stretched and compressed, and back then it wasn't broken into plates. Back then it was just the crust. And as it stretched and compressed, the water gets hotter and hotter. It wants to boil, but it can't because there's no room to expand. And then at 705 degrees and 3,200 pounds per square inch, it becomes what's known as supercritical, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's dissolving the crust above and the mantle below, and it's making elements like limestone and salts and silicas and quartz. These cementing agents are in there and a lot of salt. And then it's getting hotter and hotter. The crust is getting weaker and weaker. It's getting more and more dissolved. And then finally, in Genesis 7:11, for on the 17th day of the second month of Noah's life, the 600th year, the fountains of the great deep broke up and the windows of heaven were opened. That's when that crust cracked. It just, and Walt Brown says it was under 372,000 psi. I mean, think of that. If I had a water bottle that was under that much pressure and I just cracked it, it would destroy this building. Just boom, all that pressure expanding out, coming up. Okay, and so that crack went in two directions around the whole world. And it came together in itself like a baseball seam. And that's how it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights. This fountain was coming up, just torrential rain. And people say, well, if that happened, wouldn't it have left a mark? And it's like, yeah, that's the mid-oceanic ridge. And if you come on Sunday to Emmanuel Baptist, or even go onto my YouTube channel, you'll see the slides. The mid-oceanic ridge goes, and that's what Astro Alexander showed up there. That orange thing was the mid-oceanic ridge, okay? And so it did leave a mark. And then the water's gushing out of there with such force. You got two 60-mile cliffs. And the stuff is crumbling into the water, and that's where we get the sediment for a sedimentary rock. And these cliffs start eroding away. And they get farther and farther and farther apart, and then finally there's nothing pushing down on what's now the Atlantic Ocean. And the mantle bulges. That's how the mid-oceanic ridge formed. It bulged. North America and South America slide to the west. Africa and Europe slide to the east, and they keep going until they meet resistance, and then they buckle up. And that's how we get the Rockies, then the Andes, which are parallel to the mid-Atlantic ridge. And so that's the theory in a nutshell. There's so much more I could talk about that. And so and then the water that was, and then if something's going up, like the mid-oceanic ridge went up all around the world, the mountains, before we get to that, the mountains are a big mass on a small base, so they sink in. Well, if something sinks in, something's got to rise up. That's the plateaus. They can't explain plateaus either. And so hydraulics is how that happens. The force is gravity. Okay, and then it sinks in, you get the plateaus, and then the mid-oceanic ridges were rising up, so something has to sink in, and that's the Pacific Ocean. That's the ring of fire got sucked in. That's why the trenches are in the Pacific. That's why all those volcanoes are in the Pacific. That's why the Pacific is so much different than all the other oceans. And then the water that was covering all the Earth gushes off to fill up the Pacific Ocean. And it cuts canyons in the continental shelf. That's why we get, and then the continents sink in, the oceans rise up, and that's how we get these submarine canyons that aren't forming today. And then you got canyon in Greenland, you got all this other stuff. We can explain the ice age. You know, for an ice age to happen, it's got to snow more than it melts year after year after year. Well, to get that, you need warmer oceans and cooler continents. How do you get that? Well, those volcanoes in the Pacific, that's going to heat things up. And the continents were higher, so they're cooler. Plus all the sediment or the aerosols in the atmosphere from all the volcanoes are going to shield the Earth from the sun's heat. So 400 or 500 years of it snowing more than it melts, you get the ice age. And then during that time, the oceans cool off, so there's not as much precipitation, and the atmosphere clears up, and so now you get more of the sun's heat. And so 400 or 500 years for it to build up, 200 years, 100 or 200 years for it to melt. And we're still recovering from it to a certain extent. And then for the mammoths, some of that stuff was going up with such tremendous force. This is water and carbon dioxide, which is dry ice when it's frozen, and mud and stuff. It broke through our atmosphere, got super cold in outer space, but it didn't break away from our gravitational pull, so it came slamming down, and it buried these mammoths, and this one of them flash froze them. They could still see what was in his stomach. Any deer hunters out here? No, yeah. What do you do the first thing when you shoot the deer? And what do you take? Take the guts out, right? Yeah, because that heat will destroy it. But this thing was flash frozen, super cold. Okay, so that explains the mammoths. And then some of the stuff was going with such tremendous force, not only did it break out of our atmosphere, it broke out of our gravitational pull. So we have these things that are like dirty snowballs flying around out there. Anybody know what's been called dirty snowballs in the solar system? Anybody? Comets. Yeah, comets. And so that's why Kevin Lee, Pastor Kevin Lee, he accurately predicted what they'd find in a comet before they knew it. And they were making about Oort cloud predictions. He was making Earth predictions, and he was right. I'll show you this one real quick. This is Real Science Radio. They have some great shows. I really enjoy it. And Doug is down on the bottom. Just watch his expressions as this Astro Alexandra, she's a blind chancer, but look at what they found in a comet, and then look at that picture on Earth.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid, called Bennu, is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here in mid-ocean ridges. This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth,
Oh,
as
yeah.
Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow. She works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio in creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs a raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do.
Yeah, and that's my website. You got the heartbeat, and then the heartbeat stops. Where are you going? The only thing that matters in 100 years is, are you in heaven and who's there with you? Everything else is going to burn. So I encourage you to focus on what matters and put your time towards that. And there's a lot of victims of the government school out there. They're believing the blind chance perspective because they're believing the errors that are in the textbook. And you guys have the truth. And this is Pastor Kevin Lee. Him and I were going to be doing a hydroplate seminar in June or July. It's on the Standing for Truth YouTube channel with the debates. We're going to be presenting there. And God prepared him for just a time as this. I think he's the key to all of this. Because decades ago, he was working at a naval shipyard, and they wanted him to do engineering work, but he didn't have that degree. So he was studying to pass the engineering test so he could, be qualified to do that. So he's taking orbital physics in a college. And so he understands what's happening out there in outer space. And this is what he says.
There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. When the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting moons. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory.
And he also accurately predicted that asteroids would be flying rock piles, not solid. He accurately predicted that. And so he even said, he even emailed the guy, this NASA scientist. He said, if you try to redirect an asteroid, it'll work if it's a solid rock, but it'll fail if it's a bunch of boulders. And it failed. Now there's 38 boulders coming at us. Okay, and supposedly they're going to miss us. So I was motivated to get this theory out there so Walt Brown could get the credit he deserves before he dies. And then I was motivated, hey, we got to get this out there before NASA makes another catastrophic blunder. And now I want to get it out there because I want to destroy the Big Bang. This theory will destroy the Big Bang. I've got a playlist on it. There's YouTube channels you can go and learn about it because it gives the proper perspective of the past. I opened up by saying how Kent Hovind, his videos connected the dots. The evolutionists were lying to us, and the fossils are sign of the flood. Well, I listened to Walt Brown Week on Real Science Radio, and that colored in all the details. It just perfectly fits what we see in the solar system and what we see on Earth. It's just perfect. So we need to get this theory into the mainstream, and we need your help to do that. So I encourage you to get informed and start informing others, because you got the life preserver. There's people sinking in that lake. There's people's lives are falling apart. There's marriages falling apart. There's people getting addicted on things because they're searching for stuff. And you've got the answer. It's Jesus Christ. And I'm real thankful somebody shared that with me. Because who knows where I'd be? Who knows where my kids would be? And so I ask that you would do that too. And so basically I want all creationists on deck. There's a battle and we need you. We got more evidence against the evolution and the Big Bang than ever before. We've got more easy access to this information than ever before. There's a lot more misinformation too, but you got the truth. The truth will ring true with people. You know, so we got basically the ammo to take it down. We just don't have enough soldiers. So I encourage you to get involved. I encourage you to start a creation club maybe. Show a creation movie. I've got one for Mrs. Wright there. And I encourage you to do that. We've got just a couple of minutes. I do appreciate all the attentiveness. And does anybody have any questions? We covered a lot of things right now. Anybody have any? Yes?
How long have you been researching this?
Well, I got that first video in 2004. And so I just started learning and started taking creation vacations, getting the journals, getting the magazines, getting the books, and YouTube's got a whole bunch. It's so easy now. And so it took me probably 5 years to get equipped. And then I came out of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas, where I saw a dinosaur stepping on a human footprint, or vice versa. The guy who started that museum, he actually found a human footprint 19 inches away from a dinosaur footprint in the same layer. And he was an old earther, and he couldn't sleep for 4 nights. And I interviewed him a couple years ago at the Grace Conference, so you can see that on the podcast. So I came out of his museum and I was mad. It's like, why do I got to go to Texas to learn this? Why isn't this common knowledge? And I thought, you know, why isn't somebody doing something? And I thought, well, I'll prepare and perhaps my chance will come. And it's the adventure of a lifetime. It really is. I just love the college ministry. I love this thing because we got the winning hand. When the cards are laid down, we win. And we have the freedom to speak, and we need to use it. But yeah, good question. I encourage, you know, my cousin cracked the door open, I kicked it down. I'm praying a few of you will kick it down too and see what difference you can make in eternity. Because again, you got the answer. And it's a lost and dying world because they're believing the lies of Satan. They're everywhere. And you guys have the truth. And you're decades ahead of me when I was your age. And I remember John Wooden had a saying. He said, how did it go? It's what you learn after you know everything that matters. Because when I was your age, I thought I had it all figured out, and I didn't have it all figured out. No, not even close. Any other questions? Okay, let's pray real quick. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus, and we do thank you so much for your abundant blessings, your unending love, and your amazing grace. We do pray a special blessing over these young children, these young adults here, that you would make your way known to them, help them to have boldness to stand up for your truth, and we ask that you'd help their bodies work the way you designed them, that they'd keep walking and talking and thinking and seeing, and help them to make godly choices and surround them with godly friends, and give them an eternal perspective. And just protect them from any attacks of the Satan. And we ask a special blessing on this school, this shining light in Duluth, that you would help it to meet all its needs and let the light shine brighter and brighter, and that there could be a spiritual revival because of this school and these students. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.